I can't get enough of you." Reporters camped out in front of the funeral home, and some even took pictures inside the funeral home. Kim Suk-woo, the eldest son of K-Group chairman Kim Jae-pil and president of KEPCO, and Seol Jin-hee, a former beauty queen and broadcaster, the news of their unfortunate deaths became a global issue. 10-year-old Kim Taejun's birthday was filled with white and black. His parents are smiling in the photo, buried in white chrysanthemums, but no one else is laughing along. You're too bad. How could you close your eyes to such a young son? Instead of wishing Taejun a happy birthday, people sent their condolences. The day before his birthday, his parents were returning home from an annual event when they were killed in a car accident. With a young life growing inside his mother's belly, it was 3 people who lost their lives. The driver crossed the center line and barely missed a truck coming from the opposite direction. No, a sharp swerve saved the driver's life, but Taejun's parents, who were in the back seat, were killed instantly. It was a disaster due to drowsy driving. Despite all the commotion, their only son, Kim Taejun, held the funeral ceremony with dignity. On the day of his parents' deaths, he cried in disbelief, but he managed to keep his head above water amid the hustle and bustle. People's mouths dropped at the maturity he showed at the age of 10. Taejun's emotions were still locked inside. "Grandpa, what about that guy who killed Mom and Dad?" Taejun asked Kim Jae-pil in the car on the way home from the funeral. Did he get the death penalty? Or will he live the rest of his life in prison? Jae-pil pursed his lips at the unexpected question, and after a moment, he spoke up. "They say the sentence will be 1 or 2 years. I don't know what's going to happen yet, but it won't be the death penalty, and it won't be life imprisonment." "What? My mom and dad are dead?" Taejun asked, his eyes burning with anger. He'd never felt so helpless in front of his grandfather, who had built a huge company and ruled the world. "You don't even feel sorry for my mom and dad? You should make him spend the rest of his life in prison." "That's the kind of people we are, Taejun." Jae-pil, who understood the child's heart, said it gently. He needed to know the truth about the world. The grievances of those who live as the ruling class are grievances that no one recognizes. Sometimes we are treated unfairly because we have so much. No one understands our frustrations, and no matter how much you hate the driver who caused the accident, you can't drive him away. You have to forgive him even if you want to chase him to hell and back to make him do the same. That's the thing about social status. I know it's hard for you now, but one day you'll realize. "No, I won't. Then I'll give up my social status." Taejun clenched his fists and gritted his teeth at his grandfather's sternness. "I'll just curse that old man forever." When they reached the mansion and the gate opened, Taejun jumped out of the car and ran. "Taejun, leave him alone." Taejun's aunt, Sukwa, called quickly, but Jae-pil held her back. Taejun ran and ran and ran through the mansion's large garden. It was the most rebellious thing a young Taejun could do. Taejun knew he had more than others, but nothing he had would ever replace his parents. Now he would be alone for the rest of his life. Taejun ran until he was out of breath and finally reached the staff quarters. In the tear-stained landscape, a little girl of 6 or 7 years old was holding a lollipop in one hand and holding the hand of the mansion cook with her other hand. She was the girl he'd seen from time to time in the mansion's garden. She is Han So-eun. Taejun quickly realized that she was the daughter of the driver who had caused the accident. "Auntie, when will my dad come home? Why hasn't he come home yet?" The child asked with an innocent look on her face, a lollipop slipping in and out of her lips, making her eyes shine. Her face was white, and her short hair was in a cute braid. She was unforgivable in her sparkle. Kim Sukwa, president of the home appliance division of KEPCO, waited for her only nephew at a restaurant. A few minutes after she sat down, she saw her nephew, Taejun. Her nephew is now 30 years old. Recognizing him from afar, Seokwa's eyes lit up with joy. She had a friendly demeanor, but her broad shoulders and long bones made her seem imposing. Taejun sat down and greeted him. "I'm sorry, have you been waiting long?" "No, I just got here." Seokwa couldn't help but smile at the growth of her 30-year-old nephew, who was no longer the slightest bit boyish. "Why do you look better every time I see you? You're so clear, so clear." It was a natural reaction from an aunt who admired her nephew's appearance. Taejun stretched his lips as if he were used to hearing such comments. Soon, the appetizers arrived on the table. Even in front of his aunt, whom he hadn't seen in a year, Taejun didn't fuss. It was table manners he had been strictly taught. In the silence of the meal, without the sound of chewing food or the clinking of cutlery and utensils, Seokwa's eyes turned back to her nephew. The handsome features he had inherited from his parents, coupled with his refinement, made him the perfect young man to be given away. Who's going to take him? Doesn't he have a girlfriend? If he did, would he come back to Korea? Doesn't he have a girl following him around? Not really. If he does, why doesn't he have one? I don't know. Is he a bad personality? That's right, there's no other reason. Taejun chuckled at his aunt's joke. It's time to get married, Taejun. You're not going to get married and live like your aunt. Am I not getting married? No, I can't. Seokwa's grin grew wider as her nephew, who had been eating politely, looked furious. Taejun's lips lengthened and his cheeks puckered. Seokwa felt a pang in her stomach as she thought of her brother, who had passed away 20 years ago. Taejun was supposed to return to Korea a year later, at the age of 31, to join K Electronics. She hid her feelings and spoke softly. "You should have stayed a little longer," she said, "and I would have gotten you a job at the electronics headquarters." I was told that it was a firm promise to my grandfather, but I was surprised that my nephew had returned home a year earlier. Taejun, who had spent most of his adult life overseas except for his military enlistment, was offered a position as the head of KEPCO's service center upon his return. It was a position with the title of director, but it could have been a bit of a stretch for the third generation of the family, who came from an Ivy League family. My dad was overwhelmed. He said, "What's the head of a service center for a grandson like you who should be applauded in the holding company's business strategy office?" No, I told my grandfather that's where I'm going. When Seokwa defends her nephew and complains about Chairman Kim Jae-pil's decision, Taejun immediately denies it. "You? Why?" "Because I need after-sales service myself." Taejun replied with a smile and continued eating. Seokwa was even more puzzled. Speed is the foundation of after-sales service. People come to the center with a purpose, and you don't want to waste their time. However, service centers are always full. Even if we worked quickly without stopping to go to the restroom, we couldn't overcome the speed at which customers came in. More work was piling up than was being solved. Sweat kept pooling on the bridge of her glasses. So-eun pulled out a tissue, wiped the bridge of her nose roughly, and went back to work. So-eun quickly slammed her arms down and stomped her legs as she let one customer leave and greeted the next. She took an unpaid leave of absence, returned to work after a month, and spent the following month being looked down upon by her coworkers. I am sure they feel bad for her because she left and returned without telling them what happened. But you can't just blurt it out. Her body was swollen with fatigue from all the hard work she had done, but she couldn't say anything about it. "It's okay. You did good. You saved someone's life," she told herself again today. 2 months ago, So-eun had 65% of her liver removed. She did it to save her boyfriend Yong Hee-wook's mother, Mrs. Kim Mal-hee. After 8 months of dating, Mrs. Kim first brought up the subject of marriage. She welcomed So-eun, saying that if she had a daughter-in-law like So-eun, no one would envy her and that she shouldn't worry about the wedding, just come with her body. They began preparing for the wedding and went for a medical checkup together. Not knowing what to expect, So-eun underwent several tests as Hee-wook recommended. When the results came back, Hee-wook burst into tears as soon as he received them. So-eun, I'm glad you're type O. I wish I was type O too. It was then that Hee-wook confided in So-eun about his mother's health condition. Hee-wook told her that he wanted to give her his liver, but he couldn't because his blood type didn't match her blood type, and he cried sadly because everyone in his family didn't have the same blood type as her. Liver transplant surgery is possible even if the donor and recipient have different blood types, but the family is worried about accidents. So-eun was found to have the same blood type as Kim and was healthy enough to donate her liver. So-eun was also a potential liver donor for her mother-in-law. While liver donation is not allowed for non-family members, it is possible for those who are engaged or to be married. The mother who asked her to be my daughter was the one she said she already considered her biological mother. Mother, I'm sure my liver will be perfect for you, so I'll have it checked again. So-eun will never forget the tears that burst out of both Hee-wook's and Mrs. Kim's eyes at the same time and the overwhelmed expressions on their faces. I wanted to have a real mother, to believe we were a real family. She wanted to repay them with even more love, to be loved forever. And so, she decided for a lifetime. After a thorough medical examination, it was determined that So-eun's organs would fit perfectly into Mrs. Kim's body. Hee-wook's family was overjoyed, saying it was meant to be. So-eun was overjoyed too. Organ donation from a non-relative is a very demanding process. The donor had to prove his or her pure will and purity, without any coercion, to be approved by the state. So-eun had to meet with social workers several times to prove her innocence, and she had to prepare a lot of paperwork. Hee-wook took care of most of the headache of filling out the paperwork, but So-eun accompanied him every time. Eventually, the preparations for the surgery went well, and So-eun was finally put on the operating table. On the operating table, So-eun dreamed that the compass of her life was suddenly turned. The surgery was successful. After the surgery, she woke up alone. The pain was so intense that she could barely breathe as she realized what she had lost overnight and where her body had been cut. The first person to rush to her side when she woke up was a nurse. Ms. Han, the surgery went well. It was laparoscopic, so the wound isn't too big. What about my mom? And my guardian? She's probably in your mom's hospital room. I think they're all there because the recipient's condition is more critical. It was natural and unavoidable, but even as she resigned herself to the fact, So-eun felt a pit in her stomach. From then on, So-eun's health took a backseat to Ms. Kim's recovery. She was discharged from the hospital after a short stay, and the wedding preparations took a backseat. So-eun had to take care of Mrs. Kim while she was hospitalized herself. Hee-wook was always by her side in her spare time, and So-eun had to attend to her illness instead of preparing for the wedding. So-eun worked diligently and headed straight to the hospital after work. Although there is a bus that goes from Suwon to the hospital in Seoul, it takes quite a long time due to the distance. On the bus, So-eun made a promise to herself. We should still talk about getting married today because it's better to book a venue early. She had taken a tour of a wedding venue a long time ago but hadn't made a reservation. A medical examination and a surgery scheduled for Mrs. Kim put everything on the back burner. Now that my mother-in-law's condition is getting better, we have to start planning the wedding again. I have to say it in a nice way so as not to hurt her feelings. Once we have a wedding date, she'll cheer up and recover faster. So-eun filled her head with positive expectations and headed toward the hospital room. She could hear the sound of conversation coming through the door. It was the voices of Mrs. Kim and Hee-wook-young. Did you say Choi Hyun-ji? And she work at the same law firm? Yes. She's a fellow lawyer. That's great. Are she married? Not married. How old are she? 27. She's the same age as So-eun. Mrs. Kim sighed loudly through the hospital room door. She must be busy, but she came to visit her colleague's mother. Choi-am was beautiful. What a waste. At the sound of Mrs. Kim's voice, So-eun reached for the door handle and let go. You have such pretty and smart girls around you. Your parents are still alive and your family is good. My parents are alive and well, and good girls don't give to my mom. So-eun raised her hand, hastily covering her mouth. Mrs. Kim's lament continued. She's a sinner. She mortgaged our son's life with a bright future to get his liver. Don't say that. It's not a sin to be sick, Mom. Mom, think only good thoughts and focus on your recovery. Hee-wook comforted the grieving Mal-hee. 4 months ago, the doctor pulled up a CT scan of So-eun and Mal-hee's abdomen and explained, there is no fatty liver and the size and shape are perfect for the recipients. Hee-wook-young and Mal-hee Kim gasped at the doctor's conclusion. Thank you, Dr. Young. Mal-hee bowed her head repeatedly to the doctor as if the surgery had already been completed. You should thank the donor. The doctor gestured to So-eun. Mal-hee immediately turned to the side and grabbed So-eun's hand. Mal-hee's expression of gratitude made So-eun raise the tip of her lips in response. But she wasn't as thrilled as they were. Your prospective daughter-in-law has made a big decision. It's not the first time this has happened, but it's still not an easy decision. Blessed is your mother-in-law. That's right, my So-eun is the belly of the family. The doctor chimed in, and Mrs. Kim nodded in agreement. Hee-wook interjected. She's not just a mother-in-law. Since So-eun's parents aren't here, my mom treats her like her own daughter. Yeah, just like my daughter. Mal-hee waved So-eun's hand in agreement with Hee-wook's comment. With each wave, So-eun's body swayed. The doctor smiled at her beautiful liver and pointed back to the CT scan. There was a clear line across So-eun's liver. As she stared at the photo, her left hand went up under her right breast, and even though it was just a photo, she could already feel the throbbing in her stomach where the surgery would take place. From here to here, we'll be amputating about 50% to 60% of your liver with a right hepatectomy. Your donor's liver weighs about 1 kilogram, so we'll be resecting about 500 grams. Isn't it possible to go up to 70%? Hee-wook questioned the doctor's words. Hearing Hee-wook's voice, So-eun's left hand grew a little stronger. I think it's possible to get up to 65%, with the donor's consent, of course. Hee-wook and Mal-hee's eyes fell on So-eun at the words, donor's consent. So-eun timidly tapped the calculator in her head. Liver donors recover quickly, she thought. After a few months, you'll wonder if I've ever had surgery. The information she'd gleaned from her internet searches had given her courage, but it was still scary. So-eun asked in a small voice, how long will it take for me to recover after surgery? Usually, the liver function is normalized in 1 month. When will my liver size be back to 100%? It's hard to say for sure because it's a new organ growing, but you can expect it to be almost back to its pre-surgery size in 3 months. I trusted the doctor's opinion, which was one of the top 5 liver transplant surgeries in Korea. While So-eun nodded silently, Hee-wook continued his question. So it is not 100%, but maybe more than 100%, because you are removing the old one and installing a new one, right, doctor? Hyuk sought the doctor's agreement as if it were a good thing for everyone. He was excited that he had prolonged his mom's life. The doctor studied So-eun's expression for a moment and then reluctantly smiled broadly. "Why didn't you come to the hospital yesterday?" he asked so quickly. So-eun glanced at Hyuk's text message and flipped her phone over. Yesterday, So-eun overheard Hyuk and Malhee talking outside the hospital room and turned away. She didn't know how to face them. It was something she'd never heard them say in person before. Mrs. Kim always greeted So-eun with a smile, and before the surgery, she burst into tears, saying that she couldn't believe that a young girl would have to undergo such an operation. Of course, she didn't criticize So-eun's family or her education in person, but there was a bond she had built up over the years. They were so sweet and good people that she slowly came to terms with her heart. Yes, they even criticize you when you're not around. I'm not the same on the outside as I am on the inside. I've laughed in my boss's presence and cursed at my brother. It was my fault for eavesdropping on their conversation. He's a lawyer from a prestigious law school at a prestigious law firm, and I can imagine the temptations. I can imagine the people around him talking about how wasteful it is that he's dating an engineer who barely graduated from a 4-year college. "Hey, boss, can I get you a salad? I know you like salad." While I was lost in thought, the new junior next to me, Park Bo-bae, spoke up. It was well past noon. It had been lunchtime since noon, but So-eun hadn't been able to fulfill the morning's orders yet. Before her surgery, she ate mostly salads. The restaurant near her workplace had a lot of irritating food, so she packed a lunch from home. Mrs. Kim had long been concerned about So-eun's diet. She ordered organic vegetables and sent them to So-eun, insisting that she should eat healthy food, and made side dishes for her to carry in her lunch box. Hyuk was also very sensitive to food from the beginning of their relationship. There were many days when I wanted to eat fatty foods and drink alcohol to the point of drunkenness, but there were no such deviations on dates with Hyuk. Even when I was looking forward to the first night, he told me, "I want to save your first time until we get married." As disappointed as I was also grateful because it made me feel more loved. So-eun also respected Hyuk's fiercely guarded virginity. "We're going to get married anyway because I love you." I did. Was even that a lie? Was it true that he cared about my food and was concerned about my health? Was it because you wanted to get a healthy liver from me? Did I put off relationships because I was afraid I might get pregnant? My mind was racing, and in retrospect, I doubted everything. "Master?" she asked again, my eyes still wide open. "Oh, sorry. That's nice of you." So-eun smiled and handed him the money. "I'm going to the cafeteria." "The new director is in the cafeteria." So-eun nodded at Bae's words. She had heard that he had quietly arrived at the company, skipping the inauguration ceremony, but the new director and general manager had been popular since his first day on the job. Normally, So-eun would have been a little curious, but today, she didn't want to give anything away, so she just smiled quietly. "I heard you're from a royal family, and you eat in the cafeteria. You're quite the charmer." Excited to confirm the new director's good looks, Bae tilted his head to the side and asked sweetly, "I have heard the ricotta cheese salad is delicious, so I will order that. Is that okay?" "Yep. Okay." She waved, and her smile faded as soon as her coworker left. I picked up my phone again. Maybe it was the unsent texts that were bothering her more. So-eun took a low, deep breath and texted Hyuk back, "I've been busy. If you're busy, tell me you're busy. My mom has been waiting for a long time." This time, she replied right away. Somehow, So-eun was relieved by the quick reply. "It's okay. They won't abandon me. I won't abandon them either. I can't abandon them. I've given them a piece of myself. I'm in too deep. I can't think of any other life. I'm sorry. I'll be there on the weekend. So-eun typed out a single line of reply. 2 more text messages arrived. Okay, my dad and I both have work on the weekend. Can you watch the hospital room? Oh, and can I ask for some side dishes? I'm sending you a recipe, but I need you to make it just like this. So-eun's face fell again as she received 2 messages in a row. While I was hesitating whether or not to reply, I heard a knock on my desk right next to me. Turning her head, So-eun sucked in a breath and stiffened. A strange man had leaned in too close. She was too busy texting with Hyuk to notice. I didn't notice until the man walked right up to me. Aren't you having lunch? Ms. Han So-eun. The man looked down to check So-eun's name tag and called her by name. The man stood so close that So-eun had to tilt her head upward. He was wearing a suit, not a company uniform. His broad chest, broad shoulders, sharp jawline and bridge of the nose, the tip of his lips curving upward, his eyes with their sideways slant and pale double eyelids, froze her gaze several times in that short moment. He was pretty. It was so pretty, in fact, that it felt oddly familiar. It was as if I had met a movie star. As So-eun stared in bewilderment, the head of the HR team, who was standing next to the pretty man, introduced him. This is the new director, Mr. Kim Taejun. Yes. It was him, a royal family. The new director, who was supposed to be in the cafeteria, is here. Blushing, So-eun stood up from her seat with a gasp and greeted him. What the heck? As if So-eun's reaction was funny, Taejun picked at his lips, blew out the air, and mumbled something incoherent before speaking again. I thought you said you weren't eating. Yes, my coworker said she's bringing me a salad. Salad. Do you eat that in work? Oh, I'm on a diet. You have weight to lose. He muttered again, in a voice that sounded like it could be heard. It was hard to hear him. She didn't even know what he was talking about, so she just stood there with her dry lips curled into a tight line. Please go, she muttered to herself, her head dropping lower and lower as Taejun's feet moved. I thought he was finally leaving. Can you follow me for a moment, Chief Han So-eun? He called So-eun's name again. Her flushed face turned pale this time. She suddenly felt tired and dizzy, as if her precious liver had done a day's worth of work. What did I do wrong? Was I wrong to take unpaid leave? Was he going to take my place? Was he going to take away my job? I followed him in silence, my feet weighed down by a million frightening thoughts. Parting ways with the head of HR, So-eun followed Taejun to the elevator. Taejun pressed the button for the 7th floor. It was a place So-eun had never been before. As the elevator doors closed, Taejun asked, How long have you been with the company? For years this year. Why did you join K-Group? The famous elevator talk. You're fired if you don't answer correctly. So-eun rolled her eyes, trying to recall the best answer she had memorized for years ago. But she didn't have to answer that question, and another one followed. Where is your home? Luckily, this time it was a question I could answer right away. Kwanseondong. That's not far away. Is that where you live? Yes, I'm living on my own. Alone. Yes. After more dry questions and answers, the elevator doors opened, and the two reached the 7th floor. Taejun's long legs and different gait made So-eun follow diligently with her small steps. It wasn't until they reached the deepest part of the corridor, in front of a door that sounded like it was about to open, that he spoke again. Wait a moment. A moment later, Taejun, who had left So-eun standing in the doorway, entered the office and emerged with a heavy paper bag. On top of the heavy box inside the paper bag was a name tag labeled Eel Rice Bowl. So-eun took the bag from Taejun's hand and asked dumbfoundedly, Is that? Eel Rice Bowl. Taejun replied, Eat. The eel rice bowl my boyfriend told me about. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the name tag that said eel bowl. The general manager was a good man, a pretty guy with a big heart. Thank you. So-eun bowed her head shyly. Maybe it was because Hyuk had sent her such a text. She felt like she was going to cry over an egg bowl. Can I take it home and eat it? Sure. Okay, thank you. I'll eat it. By the way, she turned to leave, but Taejun caught her in a short rush. When So-eun stopped walking, he took a step closer and asked, "Have we seen each other before?" What? Of course not, she thought. He had the kind of looks you never forget once you see them. Unless he'd had plastic surgery, it was impossible not to recognize him. Did he mention Kim Taejun? The name itself sounded familiar. There were probably 10 people in the company with that name, if not more. In So-eun's 27 years of life, she must have passed by that ordinary name countless times. He must have, too, because the name Han So-eun is just as ordinary. But he is a man from a different world than she is. A man whose name was nothing more than 3 letters. He searched her face as if he were really trying to remember something. His gaze seemed to penetrate the inside of her glasses. His piercing gaze frightened her, and she felt as if his long, large hand would snap her glasses off at any moment. Her heart raced. His head turned more and more toward her, and she froze, forgetting to breathe. Frozen and feverish. "No go." He said this, straightening up after a moment of searching. So-eun bowed once more and left. Taejun followed her back with his eyes until she stepped into the elevator at the end of the hallway. The ends of her neatly tied hair bounced with each step. She didn't seem to recognize him, only embarrassed by his offhand question. She didn't seem to be hiding anything. He felt he had to probe further. After a long time, Han So-eun had grown into a mature woman who had erased her past. But there were still a few things that Taejun could never erase. A face that changes color all the time, the transparent skin, and the full lips parted at will. After seeing the face in person, I felt unnecessarily hungry. Taejun went to study abroad in the United States, where he became accustomed to living in another country. His grandfather, Chairman Kim Jae-pil, also gave him a lot of freedom. He was allowed to study as much as he wanted until he was 30, and then he was told to return to Korea at 31. Taejun started and ended several relationships with limited freedom. Somehow, he always felt the same emptiness at the end of each relationship. Each time, the girl wanted more than a relationship, and he couldn't give her what she wanted, so he broke up with her. She was angry each time, but he was insensitive. He got what he deserved and wondered why she was angry with him. In his last relationship, she took out his frustrations on him with a series of inexplicable tweets. "You called my name Han So-eun when you were drunk. How many times?" Taejun couldn't empathize with her anger in the slightest and muttered to himself, "On So-eun or Han So-eun." That day, Taejun muttered the name, Han So-eun, over and over again, more preoccupied with the fact that his last relationship was over than the fact that it might have been. Han So-eun, Han So-eun, Han So-eun. So-eun Han. Recalling the name opened up the memories he had buried somewhere in his head, like a blocked waterway. 7-year-old So-eun lives in the staff quarters of Taejun's house until her father, who is serving a prison sentence, returns. 10-year-old Taejun and 7-year-old Han So-eun became fast friends. The candy and caramels Taejun offered her a few times were enough to make her fall in love. A few candies and caramels later, So-eun was hooked. "Shall we play rock, paper, scissors?" "Yes. If we lose, it's chestnuts, right?" "Okay." Taejun swallowed a bitter laugh as he watched the child screaming at the top of her lungs, just to be played with. There was a pattern to So-eun's rock, paper, scissors, and once she learned it, she was a winner. Taejun used the pretext of winning rock, paper, scissors as an excuse to beat So-eun. So-eun laughed heartily, even as she received a bruise on her round forehead. Even though her forehead hurt and she had tears in her eyes, she couldn't stop playing. Taejun was willing to concede after hitting her exceptionally hard. The 7-year-old was no match for the 10-year-old. So-eun was easy to trick and tease, and whenever Taejun was bored, he would go to her and pull her hair, trip her up, or make her get covered in dirt to relieve his frustration. Taejun couldn't help but laugh along with the child, who quickly stopped crying at his scolding and laughed at his own expense. She was a stupid child who didn't realize she was being bullied. When I left him in the middle of the garden, he would cry 8 times, "Appa, Appa, Appa," as if he were the only one in the world. Like he was the only one in the world. I suddenly wondered what he was doing now. I wanted to play with her, but I didn't want to show it to the world. Taejun bought a person without anyone knowing and went looking for Han So-eun. It was just a secret amusement, something he did because he had nothing else to do with his generous inheritance, something he could do if he found her or not. Life was free, bored out of my mind. It took me a long time, and I had my limits and a dozen false starts because I didn't want anyone to find out, but eventually I found her. The moment I saw the photo my counselor had sent me, a heavy feeling in my chest began to rise, and I felt a feverish heat rising. It felt like my heart was beating with great pressure, sending heat to every part of my body. It was a photo of a woman and a man with their hands intertwined. The ring on their ring fingers was clearly visible. They were married. Taejun slowly flipped through another photo. It was an angled back view of a man facing the beach. Taejun's eyes, which had been shining with interest, turned cold.